what you want about solo leveling, you can never say that it's boring. Sure, the plot might get a little bit repetitive, as it's stuck in a perpetual loop of, oh my god, new stronger enemies appeared, but don't worry, Jinwoo's now stronger than them. At times, feels as though Jinwoo was falling through an exponential power upgrade, also that it can be more powerful than whatever new big bad gets revealed in the next chapter. But regardless of the slightly cyclical storytelling of solo leveling, and even though we know that every battle is not only going to include Jinwoo, but also include Jinwoo winning, the story keeps us on the edge of our seats. And it does this by introducing new, really cool big bads. Whether those big bads be the demons of the Demon Castle, the ants of Jeju Island, or the final big bads of the story, the Monarchs. See, because while solo leveling might just seem like a story about the world's weakest hunter slowly but surely becoming the world's strongest hunter, it's so much more than that. And the reason it's so much more than that has everything to do with the subject of today's video, the Monarchs. See, the Monarchs are effectively the final bosses of this story, an ancient race of monsters created by the Absolute Being, a multidimensional, almost omnipotent, godlike creature that could make races of gods to battle against each other for its own entertainment. And in total, the Absolute Being, this primordial figure, made 10 Monarchs. Kind of. And thus today, I want to talk about these 10 Monarchs, the primary antagonists of solo leveling. I want to break down for you who they are, what they rule over, and where they fall in respect to each other in terms of power. That's right, ladies and gentlemen, because today we're talking the Monarchs of solo leveling, ranked and explained. But before we get to ranking or explaining anything, guys, please, for me, like this video, subscribe to the page, and hit that noti bell. So, while I've done videos explaining who the Monarchs and the rulers in the solo leveling universe are, let's super quickly retouch on who exactly the Monarchs are. Now, mind you, to everyone who's already typing in information about the sequel series from solo leveling, I've barely read any of it, and I'm going to be actively avoiding information from it for spoiler purposes. I get that it's awesome that you've read it, but a lot of the anime-only people currently watching this video don't even know that it exists. Anyways, at the dawn of time, at the inception of the universe of solo leveling, all that existed was light and darkness, and, you know, the Absolute Being. And therefore, the Absolute Being at the inception of the universe decided to split this light and this darkness into two separate factions. And those two separate factions became the Monarchs, the darkness, and the rulers, the light, with the Monarchs being born to destroy the world and the rulers being born to protect it. Naturally, as these two factions were created to oppose each other, they began to war almost immediately. Now, this war raged very evenly until eventually the rulers were able to capture one of the Monarchs, Legia, the king of the giants. But because the scales of battle between the Monarchs and the rulers tipped in the favor of the rulers, and thus in order to rebalance those scales, Ashborne, who had been fighting alongside the rulers, decided to join the Monarchs as the Monarch of the Shadows. Now, Ashborne started his long and storied life as technically a ruler. He now exists on the side of the Monarchs, or at least he did. See, because the immense power of Ashborne was actually intimidating to both the rulers and the Monarchs. So in order to make sure that Ashborne never betrayed the Monarchs, two Monarchs actually teamed up together, Rakan and Baran, and they worked together to try to kill Ashborne, even though that most likely would actually work against the interests of the Monarchs because Ashborne was fighting on their side. And while Ashborne was still victorious in this battle against two Monarchs, the majority of his shadow army was devastated in this battle, and therefore Ashborne had to retreat far away from the front lines of the battle between the ruler and the Monarchs to rebuild his shadow army. And because Baran was killed in the battle against Ashborne, and because Ashborne had to retreat to rebuild his shadow army, the rulers were eventually able to claim victory in the everlasting battle against the Monarchs, forcing the Monarchs to scatter between the cracks in different worlds, and for the moment giving the rulers temporary respite as they hailed over their new universe. However, with time, Ashborne was able to rebuild his shadow army, and Ashborne decided to reconnect with Antares, the strongest of all of the Monarchs, to re-push the offensive against the rulers. And the core idea of their plan hinges on the destruction of Earth, as vanquishing the human world would allow for the Monarchs to restock their armies. And thus, as it currently stands in the solo leveling universe, the Monarchs and rulers are battling it out to either protect or destroy the Earth. And that's really all you'd need to know about the Monarchs' history before we get into ranking them. So let's get into our list, starting with our last place number 10 entry, Legia. Something you're gonna notice as we talk about the Monarchs is that every single Monarch is the monarch of something. This is because every single Monarch rules over one part of the universe, be that insects, shadows, or in Legia's case, the beginning. Yes, Legia is the monarch of the beginning. We're not entirely sure what that means. It's only made more complicated by the fact that he's also known as the king of the giants. Giants are exactly what they sound like. A race of man-eating humanoid magic beasts that are gigantic in size, that are on average as strong as an S-ranked hunter. And Legia is the king of them, which should put into perspective just how insanely strong the Monarchs are. But if Legia is the king of a race of beings whose foot soldiers are as strong as S-ranked hunters, how is he number 10 on this list? Well, mostly because we really can't put him any higher. See, to those of you who have been paying attention, you'll have heard me earlier when I said that the battle between the Monarchs and the rulers was swung in the direction of the rulers when one of the Monarchs was captured. And the Monarch who was captured, thus leading for the battle swinging in the direction of the rulers, and therefore Ashborne joining the side of the Monarchs, was Legia. And thus for multiple eons, Legia has been chained up by the rulers, thrown into a hole so dark and deep that that hole was actually thrown out itself. Now we get to meet Legia in soul leveling when an S-ranked gate opens up in Tokyo. And at the end of this S-ranked gate, chained up stands Legia as the boss of the gate. And therefore when Jinwoo eventually clears all of the fodder leading up to the boss's room, he comes face to face with Legia. But mind you, Legia has spent quite literally eons chained up with chains that have been sapping him of his magical power. And therefore Legia tries to trick Jinwoo, establishing himself as actually one of the more clever monarchs, as he uses an ability called Pledge of Trust that casts a spell between himself and another individual that doesn't allow either of them to lie. And he tries to tell Jinwoo that in the upcoming battle between the Monarchs and the rulers that's coming to Earth, that if Jinwoo frees Legia, that he'll fight on his side. Now Jinwoo sees through this farce, and Legia, understanding that Jinwoo now has no reason to trust him, attacks Jinwoo. But the thousands of years of having his magical power sapped from him makes it so he stands absolutely no chance in combat against Jinwoo, who very easily dodges his attacks and decapitates him with one slice. And thus, while we absolutely can sit here and speculate about how powerful a peak Legia might have been, based on the fact that Legia was the monarch captured by the rulers, and that he stood absolutely no chance in one-on-one combat against Jinwoo, means to me at least that it's rather obvious that he is our weakest monarch. Now, after Legia at our number 9 spot is another name that you've actually already heard, because coming up at number 9, we have Rakan. Rakan is the king of beasts and the monarch of fangs, a wildly aggressive, angry, and callous monarch, and one of the most arrogant antagonists in the entire story. And while Rakan is one of the strongest people in the soul leveling universe, and therefore may or may not deserve to be this arrogant, he is also a fierce coward, tucking his quite literal tail between his legs anytime he comes into combat against somebody stronger than him, and fleeing at the first sight of danger. But if fleeing isn't an option, Rakan is just as willing to switch sides to the person that he's battling against in order to save his quite literal hide. Already established, all of this cowardice only comes into play when Rakan fights against somebody who's stronger than him, which is rare. Rakan is immensely powerful, being able to go toe-to-toe with the likes of Thomas Andre while holding back. And mind you, Thomas Andre is the strongest hunter on Earth outside of Jinwoo at peak power. However, when Rakan decided to get serious in the battle against Thomas Andre, he was able to overpower him fairly easily. He was then able to, after disposing of Thomas Andre, take on Leonard Neerman, the 12th strongest hunter in the world. And it wasn't until Jinwoo showed up that Rakan actually had an opponent that he wouldn't be able to defeat. And yet still, Rakan was able to slice Jinwoo's skin and gouge his claws into his chest, proving that Rakan technically had the AP to be able to defeat Jinwoo if maybe he didn't dodge correctly. And this is Monarch's War Arc Jinwoo, the strongest version of Jinwoo we've seen in his story at least. And AP isn't the only place where he's slightly matched up with Jinwoo, as he also had speed so great that he was able to blitz the likes of Thomas Andre and keep up with Jinwoo. More than this, like Jinwoo, Rakan also has access to telekinesis, being able to lift several tons of debris in his battle against Thomas Andre. And if all that isn't enough, he also has spiritual body manifestation, where he, like Baek Yoon-ho, is able to either partially transform or fully transform into a gigantic wolf. And if he's injured either in his human or wolf form, he also has a ridiculous regeneration factor, being able to regrow sliced off limbs in a matter of seconds. So while he is a coward that 100% bends the knee to Jinwoo, he is still a monarch, and thus deserving of our 9 spot. After After Rakan, at our number 8 spot, we have Tarock. Tarock is the king of monstrous humanoids and the monarch of Iron Body. Now, Tarock, like the rest of the monarchs on this list up until this point, doesn't necessarily have the most impressive resume. When Antares, the monarch of destruction, and by far and away the strongest monarch, launches the Monarch's invasion of Earth, Tarock notices Thomas Andre on the battlefield and decides, oh, I'm gonna go take that guy on. And for all intents and purposes, as we are right now assuming that Tarock is stronger than Rakan, this is a battle that Tarock probably should have won. However, Thomas Andre standing on the battlefield by himself was actually a trap created by Jinwoo, hoping that one of the monarchs would try to pick him off. And it's a trap that Tarock fell directly into, because as Tarock descended down to Thomas Andre to start their battle that he was sure he was about to win, Beru and Bellion, Jinwoo's two strongest shadow soldiers, who arguments could be made for the both of them that they were stronger than Thomas Andre at this point, jumped out of Thomas Andre's shadow and began their 3v1. Now, Tarock immediately proved himself to be one of the more intelligent and self-aware monarchs, as he used his telepathic ability, he's telepathic, not all of the monarchs are telepathic, but he is, to try to connect to Antares, the monarch of destruction, to assist him in this battle against these three incredibly powerful foes. However, Tusk, who was also in the top 4 of Jinwoo's strongest shadow soldiers, severed his telepathic connection to Antares before he was able to tell Antares that he was in trouble. And thus Tarock was stuck in a 3v1 battle against 3 of the strongest entities fighting for the side of humanity. And while he used his spiritual body manifestation that turned him into a giant golem with flaming green hair, he was rather easily dispatched by the combined forces of Thomas Andre, Beru, and Bellion. But listen, I know what some of you guys are saying. You're saying, Nick, how can this guy be higher than Rakan when Rakan defeated Thomas Andre? Rakan didn't have to fight Beru and Bellion at the same time. Well, an argument could absolutely be made that Thomas Andre would be able to defeat Beru in combat. The same argument cannot be made for Bellion. Tarock got absolutely screwed over with this matchup, which is why we didn't get to see that much from him. Speaking of monarchs we didn't get to see that much from, up next on our number 7 spot is Yogumunt, the king of demonic specters and the monarch of transfiguration. Yogumunt is depicted as an elderly man with gray hair, who views humans as a weak and feeble inferior race. However, even after acknowledging the fact that he does not respect humanity's strengths, he's still intelligent enough to understand that he stands no chance in combat against Jinwoo without the assistance of Antares. But this doesn't mean that Yogumunt has never stood on business, as Yogumunt has gone toe-to-toe with the likes of Jinwoo's father, Sung Il-hwan, and lived to tell the story, something that's very rare amongst Jinwoo's father's opponents. Now, Yogumunt's true power is kind of hard to assess. See, because the majority of the monarchs that we're going to talk about today have vessels on Earth that they're able to channel their power through. And vessels are actually a really important talking point when talking about the strengths of either the rulers or the monarchs. See, vessels are humans that are able to take the full power of the monarchs or rulers who choose them. And thus these monarchs and rulers actually manifest as their vessels, which allows for them to undergo things like their spiritual body manifestation changes. Like Tarnak's golem with green fire hair spiritual body manifestation, or Rakan's wolf manifestation. But Yogumunt doesn't have a vessel on Earth, which means that Yogumunt can't fully undergo a spiritual body manifestation like the rest of the monarchs on this list. And therefore, any and all feats that we see from Yogumunt over the course of Soul Leveling story are actually his full power. And because of this, Yogumunt actually takes more of a backseat in the story of Solo Leveling, biding his time in both the Monarch's War arc and the final battle arc, and rather acting in more of a support category, as his true ability seems to revolve around portal creation, which allows for Yogumunt to make numerous portals that's able to transport the Monarch's armies between dimensions onto Earth. He's easily outclassed by Jinwoo when the two of them do clash blades, though he's not getting anything even remotely close to a high entry on this list. Fortunately, with Yogumunt out of the way, we're done talking about the fodder monarchs, because coming up at number 6, we have our first real combatant with Querehsha, the monarch of plagues and the queen of insects, and also our only female monarch. Now, Querehsha doesn't actually make it all that deep into the story, because when Silad, the frost monarch, found out that the shadow monarch, Ashborne, had actually turned against the monarchs, he reached out to all of the other monarchs and said, we have to kill Ashborne's human vessel, Jinwoo, before Jinwoo and Ashborne reached a level of power that the monarchs wouldn't be able to battle against. And while more cowardly or weaker monarchs like Tarock and Yogumunt said no, Querehsha actually said yes, as she believed it was important to kill Jinwoo while he was still weak. Lad, Querehsha, and Rakan all battled against Jinwoo simultaneously. Yes, 3 monarchs at once. And while there is a universe in which these 3 monarchs would have been able to defeat Jinwoo, because Querehsha got preoccupied during this battle by Beru, Jinwoo's second strongest shadow soldier, and her desire to make Beru Beru bend to her will, as Beru is an insect and she is the queen of insects. Jinwoo was actually able to sneak up on her while she was battling against Beru and land a surprise attack on her that sliced her in half. However, like many of the other monarchs on this list, she has an insane regeneration factor that allowed for her to immediately regenerate her lost half. And this is just one of many of Querehsha's immense strengths. She also showed the ability to punch Jinwoo so hard that it made him bleed and restrain Beru with her bare hands. She also, like Jinwoo, was able to show some kind of ruler hand type ability, a mana manipulation ability that allowed for her to generate giant green magic-based hands that she can control with her magical ability. But if you ever do come into contact with her actual body, that's not gonna be great for you, because she's able to excrete an incredibly powerful venom from all parts of her body. And once she hypothetically kills you with this venom, don't worry, she's not done with you quite yet, as she, just like Jinwoo, is also a necromancer, being able to bring the dead back to life with parasitic insects. And if all of that isn't enough, because she has a vessel on Earth, she can also use her spiritual body manifestation, which allows for her to transform into a giant insect monster, which is technically made out of a swarm of insects that she can control as weapons. Now, Querehsha does not come out victorious in this battle against Jinwoo, which is kind of sad considering the fact that she was fighting along 2 other monarchs. She does show that she is much stronger than Beru, who could and should be actively compared in strength to some of the strongest hunters on Earth. And while she wasn't able to come out victorious in a battle against the combined forces of Beru and Jinwoo, she puts on a better fight than a lot of monarchs would. But since we're talking about the monarchs who tried to jump Jinwoo before he got to his full strength, let's talk about our number 5 entry, whose true name isn't actually technically known, but he's known as either Hachwan, Silad, or just the Frost Monarch, the king of the Snowfolk. Now, if you remember the Snow Elves from the Red Gate arc, the Frost Monarch is their king, and as they were consistently shown to be stronger than B and A ranked hunters, with only the combined forces of Jinwoo and his fledgling shadow army strong enough to take them on, that should tell you just how strong the Frost Monarch is. The Frost Monarch is also a cold and calculating foe, who upon realizing that Ashborne had betrayed the Monarchs, decided that he needed to go to the other Monarchs to gather a force to destroy his vessel, which is where the 3 Monarchs versus Jinwoo battle starts. However, before the Frost Monarch even ran to the other Monarchs trying to recruit a force strong enough to take out Jinwoo before he reached his true potential, he's actually one of the first Monarchs that we're introduced to into the story, drawn to Jeju Island after the Jeju Island S-ranked gate is closed, after detecting traces of Ashborne's magic there. And it's after detecting traces of Ashborne's magic that he realizes that it's time to recruit the Monarchs to restart their battle against the rulers. And it's the Frost Monarch who kicks off this battle against the rulers by hunting down the likes of Go Jun-hee, the president of the Korean Hunters Association. And in the battle between the two of them, the Frost Monarch establishes himself as much stronger than Go Jun-hee, as the Frost Monarch is able to match the full power of Go Jun-hee while technically holding back. That is to say, without using his spiritual body manifestation. However, when Jinwoo arrives on the scene of this battle, the Frost Monarch retreats, identifying that his strength is not enough to take on the likes of Jinwoo. And it's at this point that the Frost Monarch goes to recruit the likes of Rakan and Querehsha. So how does the Frost Monarch fare in his second battle against Jinwoo? Well, like we've already established, the Frost Monarch has an insane amount of strength, being able to push Jinwoo to his absolute limit with brute force. On top of this, he also has speed to match it, as he's able to easily dodge attacks from the likes of Go Jun-hee, one of the strongest hunters Korea has to offer, and pressure Jinwoo in both their first and second battles. But brute strength and speed aren't technically the Frost Monarch's only abilities. His true strength lies in ice magic, as he's not only able to fire torrents of ice magic out of his mouth, but he's also able to easily create gigantic walls of ice or weapons out of ice. But if that's not good enough, he's also able to put humans to sleep with a simple snap of his fingers, and if all else fails, he has his spiritual body manifestation. A manifestation that gives him a more youthful appearance, makes his hair longer, his ears longer, and for some reason, most likely because he's an elf and everybody wants to see elves naked, takes all his clothes off. But as the combined forces of the Frost Monarch, the Insect Monarch, and the Beast Monarch were not enough to take down Jinwoo, we can't put him that high on this list. But you know who we can put pretty high on this list? A name that you've actually already heard in this video, and a face that anime-only watchers have already seen, because coming up at number 4, we have Baran. Baran? I actually don't know. All of the Monarch names are weird. Baran? I don't know. I'm gonna pronounce it like Iran. For those of you who have been paying attention to this video, and also the anime, as Cody is viciously Googling to flash images of Baran's face to you right now, some of you are going to start to make some connections. See, because Baran was the king of demons and the monarch of white flames. But when I say was, and you start to see this face, you start to think, oh, is that because Jinwoo killed him in the demon castle? And the answer to that question is, aggravatingly enough, No, because if you guys will remember from the very beginning of this video, I told you about how two separate monarchs worked together to try to kill Ashborne when they realized they were intimidated by his power. And those two monarchs were Baran and Rakan. But in this battle against Ashborne, even though Rakan was able to get away, Baran wasn't, as Baran was killed by Ashborne to prove a point to all the other monarchs and rulers that he's not to be trifled with. He was killed by Ashborne literally thousands of years ago. Who did Jinwoo fight? Well, a copy of Baran. Antares, also known as the Architect, also known as the Giant Smiling Face in the Double Dungeon, to serve as the final boss of the Demon Castle for Jinwoo to battle against. However, this copy that Jinwoo fought against is undoubtedly weaker than the actual Baran, as the actual Baran was not only powerful enough to battle against Ashborne, who was well known to be, if not the strongest monarch, the second strongest monarch, but also had the ability, like Yogumunt, to open portals through which he could summon the entirety of Hell's army. Because mind you, he is the monarch of Hell. And it's because of this ability to summon the entirety of Hell's army that he was able to devastate the majority of Ashborne's shadow army, causing Ashborne, after defeating Baran and Rakan, to needing to retreat for a couple hundred, if not 1,000 years to rebuild his own shadow army. But if being able to control the entirety of Hell's army wasn't enough for you, Baran also has lightning breath that can not only devastate his opponents, but also apply a stun debuff that it can either focus on a singular opponent or use as an AoE attack. And considering the fact that a clone of Baran was almost enough to kill Jinwoo without the distraction of Jinwoo's little elf demon girl, he, even though he died thousands of years before the main storyline, deserves to be higher on this list than the majority of monarchs. But since we're talking about people killed by Ashborne, we might as well talk about Ashborne at our number 3 spot.
Well, Nick, did you just say that Ashborne might have been the most powerful monarch in existence? And if he wasn't the most powerful monarch in existence, he was the second most powerful monarch in existence?
Yeah, I did, and he still kind of is. Ashborne was the king of the dead and the monarch of the shadows. He's also the greatest fragment of brilliant light and the strongest out of all of them. What does that second thing I just said mean? We're not going to talk about it. Established time and time again that the only monarch who stood a legitimate chance in combat against Ashborne, or even a vessel of Ashborne, was and is Antares. And this is proved time and time again, either through Ashborne's vessel, Jinwoo, or just by Ashborne. As in Ashborne's battle against Rakan and Baran, he's shown decimating entire armies of hell just with brute force. And if you're getting to understand why Jinwoo resorts to just strengthening it out in every situation that demands it, him being the vessel of Ashborne, who also basically just uses brute force whenever the situation demands it, starts to make a lot of sense. On top of this, Ashborne was able to take on 2 monarchs simultaneously, and was able to crush Baran's head like a grape with just one hand when Baran started talking gibberish at him, while Ashborne was trying to get information out of him at the end of their battle. But when it comes down to it, Ashborne has one of the deepest bags out of all of the monarchs. He can shapeshift, allowing himself to look like anybody or anything whenever he wants. He can cast illusions, which basically amount to genjutsu. He has umbrakinesis, aka the control of shadows, which allows him to control his and other people's shadows, shaping them into whatever he wants, be it clothing or weapons. And every single ability that Jinwoo has ties its roots back to Ashborne, whether that be ruler's authority, which is the telekinetic ability that Jinwoo has, which Ashborne has because he started as a ruler before he switched over to the side of the monarchs. Shadow extraction, which allows for Jinwoo to turn the dead into shadow soldiers. Shadow exchange, which allows for Jinwoo to swap places with one of his shadows regardless of where they are. And Monarch domain, which allows for Ashborne to make a giant AoE bubble around him that buffs the stats of all of his shadows within that bubble by 50%. Jinwoo can do, Ashborne can do better, is what I would say if I was a liar. Because even though Jinwoo is the vessel of Ashborne, boy oh boy does he surpass him in power. Now, this is technically because Ashborne was looking for a vessel for his power on Earth, because amongst all of the rulers and monarchs, he was the most fiercely loyal to the absolute being, and therefore spent his entire existence trying to obey the absolute being's will, which was enacting the balance of the darkness and the light in the universe. Though Ashborne is kind of a hypocrite in this regard, because Ashborne wants to end the war between the monarchs and the rulers, which is actively something that the absolute being did not want. The absolute being created the monarchs and the rulers for his own entertainment. Anyways, Ashborne needed a vessel amongst humanity to end this war between the rulers and monarchs, and therefore he went to Kangaroo to find a human with the right physiology to become his vessel, and then he had Kangaroo create the system to put that human through a trial that eventually would make that human strong enough to absorb the entirety of Ashborne's powers. And boy oh boy did Jinwoo pass with flying colors. However, we're not to Jinwoo yet, because we still got to talk about a number 2 entry on this list, Antares. See, Antares is the king of dragons and the monarch of destruction, widely believed to be the strongest monarch in existence, and also the leader and oldest of the 9 monarchs, who ends up becoming the final antagonist of solo leveling. Antares is the monarch of destruction and king of dragons, is a true force of nature. He possesses a level of physical strength that is said to be greater than that of the Shadow Monarch, and this is pretty much immediately proven in Jinwoo and Antares' first battle. As the first time that Antares and Jinwoo come face to face, Antares easily overpowers him. On top of this, even though speed appears to be Jinwoo's greatest ability, Antares' speed is almost immeasurable, as in the first battle that Jinwoo and Antares ever have, which mind you happens after Jinwoo dispatches of the majority of the Monarchs, Antares is able to keep up with every single movement that Jinwoo makes, and moves so fast that he's able to launch counterattacks that Jinwoo can barely dodge. And if Jinwoo ever did get lucky enough to land any hits on Antares, his durability is such that he was almost impossible to cut in any conventional way. On top of this, pretty much any and all unique abilities that we've said that any of the Monarchs have, Antares also has. He has shapeshifting, like Ashborne, telepathy, like Tarock, a breath-based magic attack called Breath of Destruction that allowed him to fire a torrent of fire out of his mouth so powerful that it immediately turned S-rank hunters into ash, easily negate any and all of Jinwoo's attacks, and also permanently kill the usually unkillable shadow soldiers. In fact, it's stated that there is nothing in the universe that wouldn't face destruction under the power of this attack. Now, this ability stems from the fact that Antares' true powers lie in fire magic, which is why his spiritual body manifestation technique actually turns him into a gigantic red dragon, with a power so great that truly the only person who stood a chance in the entire universe against him was Jinwoo. But since we're talking about Jinwoo, boy oh boy do I wonder who number one is. Can you guess it? Do you know? It's Jinwoo. It's called solo leveling for a reason, because by the end of this story, Jinwoo becomes the new Shadow Monarch. And surprise, surprise, in the power fantasy story, Jinwoo wins every fight he gets in. And while I could run down the relatively long list of all of Jinwoo's abilities, his feats, how strong he is, I've done all of that already in my video. How strong is Jinwoo? I mean, the man defeats all of the Monarchs in the original timeline with the help of the rulers, uses the Cup of Reincarnation, which allows for him to go 10 years back into the past, and then defeats all of the Monarchs again, saves Antares for last, defeats him in a one-on-one battle, which mind you, took him 27 years to get to. Yes, he fights for 27 straight years. However, in the wake of their second battle, the only injury that Jinwoo gets while fighting against Antares is a light burn on his left hand. No duh, he's the strongest Monarch. Every MC of the anime that they're in, if we're talking about a category that they could possibly fall into, is usually the strongest person in that category. JJK notwithstanding. And with that, that's all of the Monarchs in solo leveling ranked and explained. But do you guys agree with my list? If you had to rank the Monarchs from solo leveling, where would you put them? Tell me in the comments below. And while it goes down there, please, for me, like this video, subscribe to the page, and hit that noti bell. Man, I love being jet lagged. I'm done with the video by 9 a.m.